Okay, welcome back everybody. We're going to start project number 11 today, which is going to be a 90-degree elbow with a square throat and a radiused heel, or curved back as they rephrase that. Okay, so let's go ahead and we're going to grade it again, plus or minus 1/8 of an inch of your dimensions. On page 56, it's just got a little bit of a write-out of a general project. These are not your dimensions that you're going to be fabricating to in class. These are just going along with some of the write-up that they've got here. So let's get into the actual dimensions on page 57 here of the plans. 57 is basically laid out with the square throat and the radius heel or the back of this fitting here. If you notice, they've got a 1/2 inch line again on the top and the bottom, or sorry, rather the side and the bottom. It does nothing for us for fabrication other than to tell us that's essentially where our drive and slip is going to be going after a while. But we do need to take it into account with this 2 or rather 2.5 inches to the edge of the sheet in here as well. So first thing I did is I determined what my width of my piece was. Again, I figured my 10 inches, watching my dimension lines for the inside and the inside, and then going over to the 2 inch, and then figuring in this additional 1/2 here on the bottom. So we've got 10 and 2 is 12.5 with that, plus don't forget your quarter. So we got 12 3/4, and then on the bottom, because these are the same size openings, it's again going to be 12 3/4 identical. So essentially we got this piece laid out, and this is scrap, so it's got some dents in it, and I'm going to use it for demonstration purposes, but I try to have them out of there in the field so they're not showing, but for our purposes it'll be okay. So the first step that I took in laying this project out, let's go ahead and slide the plan out of the road here. I got my piece cut 12 3/4 by 12 3/4, both directions. It's a square sheet, that direction as well as that direction, and that works just fine. So then I have to take into account my dimensions on the bottoms and the tops and everything. We're going to have our radius. Again, we don't have to worry about a left and a right on this project because it is a 10 inch and a 10 inch opening. Say if it was a 10 by 8 or a 10 inch and an 8 inch opening, then you really got to take into account like a mirror image of this one if you flipped it over, but right now we can just flip it, so you'd have to mirror image that this way and then bring your radius out the back and then the square throat in the inside there. So looking at my part, making certain there's no writing on it. So on this one here, it does have writing on the inside. That's why I did that one, because it's got some marks. Again, it is a scrap piece there. So let's go at this. First thing I took into account, set the ruler off to the side there, was the 1/2 inch on the bottom and the side. So I just simply took my my scribe with the dimension marks on it and set it on the edge of the table and marked my 1/2 inch all the way across on that side, and then we'll do the same on the vertical. At this point down, the 1/2 inch marks would be basically extended through into the corner of the square. The next thing I'm going to take into account is this 1/4 inch outside or outer section here on the drawing up there, and I don't know if you can see that, but the 1/4 inch up here for the lock form to bend, and we're going to roll that actually on easy edger, which you haven't seen yet, and we'll get to that in a second. But if you notice, the radius doesn't exactly start down here. It starts right here where this dotted line is, or rather 2.5 inches in from each side. So these sections 2.5 inches up from the edge of the sheet is going to be a straight 1/4 inch. So let's do that now. So just again using my scribe, we'll take the 1/4 inch and we'll run that down on both edges. That radius is going to be like this here, so we're going to finish this 2.5 inches up there as well. All right, so that's basically your easiest marks of the bunch there. The next thing I'm going to take into account is figuring out this interior or internal dimension that we need. So from here up to our dotted line is going to be 2 plus the 1/2 inch distance there. So let's go ahead and take that into account now with that. And I'm going to do that by taking my square, setting it at 2.5 inches, and then I will use my scratch awl and we'll lay them out making certain I got the part laying right. So I got my 1/2 inch and my 1/2 inch side here. So we'll set it at 2.5 inches, and we'll run that in a little ways there. And we'll do the same on this edge of the sheet, trying to keep as much surface area of the square where it needs to be. Alright, if we look at that, it also shows that we need an additional 1/4 inch from our 2-inch mark, which we just put in there, or rather our 2.5 inch mark from the edge of the sheet. We've got to come back a 1/4 inch. So I'm just going to reduce the square by a 1/4 inch and drop it down to 2 1/4 versus 2.5, and we'll repeat that that same process again. Again, setting that square so the majority of the surface area is on the piece. And now I've got my internal 1/4 inch marked, as well as most of my external 1/4 inch here as well. I don't know if you can see them, but basically we've got a square in here in this area, and then your 1/4 inch and your 1/4 inch in this section will be cut out of the piece there, and it'll finalize. It'll be looking the mirror image of this bent up versus these being bent down on that that section. So it'll be right there, just like that. So let's set that aside. Before we go any further, we're going to look at this and we're going to try to finish this exterior radius. So we're going to have to determine where they actually made that radius from, and it shows on the plan that this is the radius mark for the outer portion. So it's going to start right at this point. If you went to this point, then your radius out here would be shorter than it should normally be. So it's important that we get to that 2.5 inch mark. So I'm going to use my scratch awl, and I'm just going to put a small divot in there. It's kind of like a center punch point, so I've got something to keep the dividers straight with. Here are my dividers that I'm going to use. Basically, it's a double form of a scratch awl and a pivot point that can be adjusted in and out on this here. So if I look at my plans here, it says from my internal radius to or my internal pivot point to my internal radius here is going to need a distance, if we drop down here, of 10 inches in between there. So a real easy way that I found to set these things, you can take a tape measure and measure it, or if you get one of these combination squares like this one here, if you just take it apart, these lines a lot of times are engraved, or they've got like a little cut in them so they don't wear off. What you can do is if you set it right on your inch, and you can use what they call the burn one method. If we need 10 inches, we're gonna set it at 11, and then we're gonna burn one, and that'll come out 10 inches. So if I set it at 1 and 11, we've taken care of our 10-inch mark, and then we just tighten it up right on those, which I've done from the previous project. So let's set that aside. Go to our pivot point over here. We find our radius. Slide the books out of the way. And then remember, we're going to be starting 2.5 inches back from that edge is where that radius is going to actually start. So we're going to take our dividers, and we're going to just simply drag that around, making certain this pivot point, and then again it's going to stop 2.5 inches from that edge. If not, you can see, I hope you can see it here, how the radius actually got shorter than where it's supposed to be out here on the part. So that's our internal line here on the radius. Now we've got to add an additional 1/4 inch to that for the lock form. So again, we can simply take our square. It was set at 1 and 11 before for a 10-inch mark. Now I'm going to add an additional 1/4 inch and set it at 1 and 11 1/4, and it will give me an actual 10 1/4 inch dimension. So essentially we're going to burn one on the ruler with that. And then just go ahead and make sure it's right there after you've retightened it up, and that's going to work just fine. Set that aside, and right back to our original pivot point down here, 2.5 inches in. It should be right on the edge of the sheet if we cut our dimensions right there at the 2.5 inch mark, and we're going to pull that around until it stops about 2.5 inches and slips off the sheet up there as well. At this point in time, I believe I've got all my fabrication marks put on here. If I can get the thing up off the table. It's kind of tight there. There we go. With that, so I've got my radius, my outer 1/4 inch radius, which is going to stop 2.5 inches shy from the edge, and then I've got my internal, my square throat. So we're up to the cutting point of this fabrication process. Okay, so just 2.5 inches, and notice we don't have to start on the edge of the sheet because the outer mark stops like 2.5 inches up. So you just got to start in there, and be kind of careful with this because these little tails, they like to poke you in the fingers, so I try to just bend them down out of the way so they don't build up and catch you. And then we're just going to cut that radius as smooth as possible along that line. And if they get in the road, just kind of roll them over. And again, it will not cut to the edge. It's just going to be about 2.5 inches up, and that'll be the last point. Once you got this here, you can just bend your corners over and then throw it in the trash. Okay. The next thing we're going to proceed to do is cut out our internal square throat on here. So using my straight snips now, I'll cut up to the point that I need, which is not exactly 2.5 inches. It will be after it's bent, but it's going to be 1/4 inch short, so rather 2 1/4 inches from the edge, and we should be able to take that square section right out of there. And then don't forget, we need to, in order to bend these in a second, we are going to have a relief cut here, just from point to point on our 1/4 inch. And we can get rid of that part. The last thing we got to do is we got to notch the sections so they don't get in the road later on of our slip and drives, and everything connects nicely together. So using the 3/4 inch notcher right on your 1/4 inch marks, we'll just cut them right in like this here. Again, those 1/2 inch lines, they don't do anything for us. They're just an indication of where that's going to be later on. And then when I take my corners off, I don't really want to have them set straight. I want to just a couple degrees back. It doesn't have to be much, just a little bit, and that'll help prevent any additional sharp points on the part. Okay. At this point in time, just like the previous project, I can take my seamers and I can bend these internal small edges up to a 90 degree. Essentially, this part is no different than the previous project with the square the square heel and the square throat as well. But the next part is going to be different because we can't bend these on the can't bend the radius on using the apron brake over there. We're going to have to use what they call an easy edger to do this. So right over here, I've got the easy edger, and it's basically two different wheels that work together, and the one has an internal V and the external is a point on that. And this part is going to roll through that. But before you get started, notice there's a slit in the side, and some of them came with it, and some of them were cut in, to my knowledge, after the fact. So we just right on the edge there, we put it in our little starting area, and we're going to bend that to a 90 degree. Pull it right down there. Now the easy edger can be pretty forgiving, but it can also be somewhat challenging for beginners there with that, because it can aggravate you with that. So before I start this part, I'm going to try to point out a couple things. In this wheel, this is the bottom groove down here, and then there's a slight upper groove. This one's probably got a little more wear on it than some, and then you got the top of the wheel as well. We're going to try to ride the edge of the sheet just so it's pulling up on this bending groove, not the bottom one, but the upper or the stop point of the sheet there with that one. So with this, the other thing that we can watch in the second, we'll be running this through twice, is our previously scribed mark. So let's go ahead and start with this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to set the edge of the sheet up here, right on the edge of that part there. And this will adjust your tension on the wheels up and down for that section. So right now I've got it fairly loose. I could probably tighten it up a little bit so there's some tension on it. And then being very careful not to get too high like this or too low like this here. So I'm just going to back up and fix that. You know, they are pretty forgiving for you, so we're going to pull that around there, watching where that's at, and that's just a matter of pivoting the sheet so it lines up on that edge. So we're going to roll that through, and it pays to go slow, exceptionally slow on that first round, making certain you follow your mark and get that bent to a pretty decent 90. The first time through, and I'm probably making this look fairly easy because it is more challenging than it looks, and you know, but after you've done a bunch of them, you'll get the hang of it. So once you get done, the piece is going to look like this, and it's going to have some dents and some grooves, and actually this one turned out pretty well, but it's not a full 1/4 inch yet, so we're actually going to try to pull that in and make it just a little bit wider, and basing it off of my 1/4 inch scribe mark that I had previously made. So now I'm going to watch my inner 1/4 inch scribe mark to the tip of this wheel, and I'm going to tighten the tension up even further. So we're going to pull that in there, and if you want to make it this taller, you pull the sheet down. If you want to make this shorter, you're going to push the sheet up. But I'm going to try to follow my mark, and it's really hard to tell because it's almost really close to that edge there. But we're going to see if we can line that up just where it needs to be on the on that 1/4 inch. So we'll run it through, something like that, trying to maintain a nice smooth edge. The smoother they are, the easier they will go into your lock form on the other piece. And then trying to pull this in, you can really see it here where the bend was here, and I'm going to try to move it to that edge by just putting tension on my sheet. And when it comes out the other end, if you put enough tension on it, it pulled it up there, and we didn't exceed that 1/4 inch. We don't want to exceed that 1/4 inch because it won't, we can bottom out in the other lock form. So with that, we've got the 2 cheeks complete,